You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. I'm your host, Saul Muerte, back again to dissect and discuss the films of the great director John Carpenter. And we're starting to whistle our way down to the finer ends of John Carpenter's career as we're coming towards the climax of the films that he produced in like the late 90s and a little bit of 2000s as well. We've kind of gone a little bit out of sync. We did our last podcast we looked at was Escape from LA, and we are now going to be kind of going back to the film that came out prior to that in 1995, which was actually a remake of a 1960 film called Village of the Damned. In itself was based on a novel by John Wyndham called The Midwich Cuckoos. And something I will touch on as well, when I come to introduce my fellow podcaster in but a moment, is that I was semi-aware that there was also a sequel to the 1960 film as well, which was called Children of the Damned. And I want to say I've seen it, but then I'm not so sure. A lot of these things get kind of confused and blurred a little bit. If you're not familiar with the concept of what the Village of the Damned is and you're new to this, and the idea is that the Surgeons of Horror team will dissect and discuss these films and the plot narrative, the themes that come out of it, and more importantly, do these films still stand true today? What would a modern film goer think of this film if they were presented with it on the screen, or are they just discovering it for the first time? But the concept of the Village of Damned is essentially like that there is an alien race that take on the form of these children, all look very identical, blonde-haired, very Aryan race thing going on. What's going on? But also a little bit Stepford Wives-esque in their behavior and that very non-human, non-expressive nature that goes about them. And they come up with some evil shit too on the way. And we'll talk about the narrative, as I said, as we dissect and discuss these in a bit more detail. Before we do so, I will need an offsider with me to discuss these films to the very core, to the very bone, and rip these things apart and gnaw along their flesh, or something along those ways. So in order to do that, I will introduce you to my offsider, as I said, who this episode is none other than Oscar Jack. Welcome aboard, Oscar.
Good to be here, Saul. Good to be in the village of Midwich.
Midwich, yes. So nice, quaint little town, and prone to alien visitations at certain points in the year. Look, I'll open it up first. I open this question up to my offsider as well. Before we start talking about the narrative of these films. Were you aware of the John Carpenter film, firstly, and were you equally aware of the 1960 version, and which one fell into your periphery first?
I think actually the first thing that dropped into my head of this was an episode of The Simpsons, which I believe came out after this movie. I think it was around season 5 or 6. It would have been right around the kind of the time where they had essentially a parody of the 60s film.
Yes.
Which I remember kind of seeing and just like being kind of quite taken with, and also the fact that the cover for this film was one of those VHSs that I always saw as a kid in the video store when there were video stores. It was one that always grabbed me, and I always found it so just like terrifying. All of these blonde children with their glowing eyes on the front. So that was definitely I was much more aware of this film, of the John Carpenter film, than the original. And I kind of pulled myself into it, getting really kind of obsessed with this idea that John Wyndham has done so many wonderful kind of sci-fi kind of core concepts, and this one just stuck with me since I was a kid.
Yeah. That's interesting too, because like we talked about John Wyndham, and we were kind of sort of discussing him off record before the role. But we do need to kind of pay him a little bit due, and I was due respect. I was talking about the book that really, and not just the book, but the film that really gripped me of his most of all was The Day of the Triffids. And it was one of those books that I had on my bookshelf as a kid. I went to it countless times and equally did so when I then discovered that the film existed of it too, which I only discovered a little bit later on in my life. And just fell in love with that whole kind of the whole story around it. Really, essentially, was just, to me, was an amazing book. But I was never really aware of the Midwich Cuckoos, which is obviously what this film is based on, until a lot later. And I do try and read the books before we do the podcast. I've noticed actually when I'm listening back to the previous episodes, I've become a bit slack in that terrain. But thankfully, you have, although it may have been a few years ago.
Little while. I think I got on a bit of a roll. There's a whole bunch of really beautiful new covers that were all released for his films.
Yes.
Like gorgeous artworks. And so I had just finished reading Day of the Triffids, read The Kraken Wakes, and then went on to the Midwich Cuckoos. And so I kind of was on a real steamroll through his work. And it's certainly probably like one of his smaller books, one of the smaller stories.
Sure.
Because it's all focused on this village, which in the 60s film as well as the book is an English town.
Yes.
And of course in the John Carpenter version is transferred to the States. And because it like essentially just takes place all in this one, whereas all of his other books are quite, in some parts, quite global.
Yes.
It's a real kind of different shift, and the book's a little bit slower. It's a bit more kind of contemplative and kind of philosophical as a lot of his work is, but it has kind of less active action. You read it and it's less of a disaster film, which a disaster story, which Day of the Triffids and The Kraken Wakes both are very much. And this is kind of just it's verges on that, touches on that kind of disaster kind of thing, but it's almost almost like the kind of the penultimate bomb in this movie. It's kind of like this could end up being that.
Yes,
this is like the very beginning of something that could like end the world, maybe.
Yeah. That's right.
These little freaky kids have their way.
That's exactly right. I was just looking at some notes here too, and one of the influences of not this film, but The Day of the Triffids was on the screenplay for 28 Days Later, which was written by Alex Garland. So it kind of tells you the significant impact that Wyndham has had on modern filmmakers as well. One of the ones that really, really shook me as a kid was, and this was the television representation of it, was a series called Chucky, which I'm not so sure if Australian audiences got it out here, but where we are recording at the moment. I'm primarily from the UK originally, and it was a big thing in the UK as a series, and essentially the concept of that film, and it spawned a load of Chucky kind of series as well. But there's a kid who befriends who we think originally is an imaginary friend, but he actually turns out to be an entity from space who has the ability to kind of control people's minds a little bit. But it was there was parts of it that was chilling to watch. I must have watched it when I was extremely young, but it always left a really deep impact on me growing up. And it's one that I know fellow podcaster Anthony Yee, Big Cheese, whenever we've chatted offline about stuff, that whenever Chucky comes up, he does remember it, but he's a big sci-fi nut. So it probably would enter his realm. But yeah, it resonated with him too. So yeah, so John Wyndham wasn't just Day of the Triffids, it was also this series called Chucky as well, which was really impactful. So and my point is like he's come with a wealth of these books that have had a big impact, especially in the sci-fi genre. And we've discussed John Carpenter for a while now. We've gone through a lot of his films, and even though he's known primarily for his horror films, I'd argue there's a lot of sci-fi in there too, and this would definitely fall more into that category than horror, I would say. There are horror elements in it, don't get me wrong, but this is very much more like a sci-fi invasion film, essentially, that we're witnessing. So, where am I going with that? So the eyes thing. I wanted to touch base on the eyes thing you were talking about. So obviously being in colour is a big impact on the film, or a significant difference to the 1960s film, which was black and white. But one thing that struck me when I was re-watching this time around, I wasn't so familiar with it whenever I first watched it, was the colour of their eyes changes. And I wasn't, and in the midst of it, I was like, what meaning does that have behind each colour? Because like green is predominantly in there. And I thought, are they green when they're putting the people under hypnosis? Because I was like, wondering if that was the case. And then, but there was obviously the more known red fiery anger. That's when their emotions are boiled over and they do the terrible things that they do. But I think there was other colours in there too. I'm pretty sure there was a blue in there.
Yellow.
Anyway, yellow as well, yeah. So I kind of was like, what? I never really was able to pinpoint what each of those colours represented, because once I thought I was getting somewhere with it, and then all of a sudden something else would happen, and I'm like, oh, maybe not so much. I mean, am I thinking too much deep about this, Oscar? Am I lending too much weight to this one thing, or?
No, you know what? This is along the same kind of lines of a lot of the thoughts I've had post watching the movie. Is that I don't think you are. I don't think the movie dives in deep enough.
Yeah.
Because that is like there's so much wealth, and I'm like, for me, kind of discussing this film, it really is for me. What kind of adaptation is it? Because I'm like bought and sold for the concept.
Yes.
I think the story. I'm so in for it.
Yeah.
And so I'm an easy sell for that. So for me, it's just kind of like, how well do they kind of explore it, and how well do they use all of the little elements that that make this story so interesting. Red is bad. You don't want them looking at you. Red is always bad. Red's the worst, I think.
Yeah. Of course. So the other thing, what was I going to touch on with that? So so I'm just, man, maybe you don't need to answer this question right now, Oscar, but I'm going to put it out there, and it might be something we come back to when we come to kind of round out our discussions. But obviously what makes the book, what makes the 1960s version, is the quaint little English town that it's set in, and that it's so remote, and yet the most remote of places, evil can lurk, and it could cause the end of the world, like we were saying. Whereas I wonder whether the Americanization of this story is part of the downfall. And I think if it was a bit more, it never feels quite like, and don't get me wrong, this isn't about me being anti-American, because we all know America has quaint little towns, right? And I'm saying I don't know if that was captured on screen enough for this to have the damning presence that needed to come across. And I think that would have been interesting to exploit that a little bit more. Make the town never felt quaint to begin with, and peaceful enough. There was a lot of these characters we were introduced to early on. There's a lot of people at play, and it felt like the focus was more on these people rather than what the town was itself. There was no sense of community before the community got destroyed, essentially, is my point. Whereas I felt like what I loved about the 1960 version is the opening sequence alone is just brilliant. And it's, to me, is still iconic in the way that you have this character who you think is going to be your lead drop dead, presumably dead, on screen in the middle of a phone call. And that's that. How more impactful can that be as an opening sequence? You're just like, wow. And this feels like it's a bit preambling at the beginning of this film, and it never, I don't know, I just felt like the tone wasn't quite set in the right place before we got the get-go, if that makes sense. Like, let's talk about some of the, like, let's just mention some of the stars that are in it before we kind of start delving through this, because I do want to talk about Christopher Reeve, who's our lead in this, right? Now, to me, he's always Clark Kent. He will always be Clark Kent, and there's nothing anyone can say about him that will, or Clark Kent for that matter, which will sway my opinion. I know there have been various other Clark Kents since him, but to me, he's my Clark Kent. It's like everyone has a doctor in Doctor Who, right? Like, he's my Superman and always will be. So in my eyes, like my little kid eyes, that's like if I'm looking through my kid glasses as an adult, the guy was always be indestructible, even though I quite tragically, as it turned out, he is human, and had a very kind of hard life towards the end of his years.
This was the last film.
That's what I was going to come to. Well, before the accident,
or the same.
Yeah. I don't know when it. Yeah, you're right. I don't know when it happened, but yeah, it was the last film he did when he was 96. When he was an able-bodied person. Yeah, because it was a tragic horse accident, wasn't it, that occurred? But that, not meaning to sweep that aside in any stretch, but because he did fantastically do a version of Rear Window when he was wheelchair-bound, which, look, it's always going to be hard to match Jimmy Stewart, let's face it, but you know, it's a great performance. So if you've never seen the Christopher Reeve version of that, I do recommend you watch it. So that aside, like his performance in this, he's always captivating on screen. But again, it was this thing where it kind of felt like his character was not deep enough, not rich enough for you to kind of go on that journey. Like I don't know what it was about the. I'm trying to think of the George Sanders, who played the professor in the 1960 version. He had a lot of gravitas to his role, and like, look, he was a professor. He felt like he was a professor in this, and Christopher Reeve never really came across to me as. What was he? Was he a scientist in this, or
no, he was a doctor?
He was a doctor. That's right.
Physician.
He's the physician, and then he becomes the teacher, kind of part of it. And that bit, which in the 1960 version as well happens, but it's a bit more believable when a professor who is all about the power of the mind has to combat these people by using his mind to stop them from reading his mind. Yeah, so like, look, there's a lot more weight to that being a believable idea, whereas having Christopher Reeve as this doctor character, albeit lovely doctor, lovely village doctor, lots of people respected his opinion, but having him as this character who would then try and change about the course of events never run true to me. The most powerful thing I felt for him, and I know I'm jumping through the narrative, but for me was his performance of when his wife dies and coming to terms with that the person that caused the death of his wife is potentially this child that he then still has to raise as his own. And in that instance, in those few little scenes where that kind of happens, you see that disgust in him and not really knowing what to do with that disgust, coupled with the fact that he is also forming a little bit of a bond with the boy kid in it too. There's like that, he recognizes that this boy is slightly different to the others,
David, the one lone child who is not paired up,
who is played by a very young Thomas Dekker, who would go on to play John Connor in the Terminator Sarah Connor Chronicles. Thomas Dekker, young Thomas Dekker. And so he's another one. But also look at some of the other cast in it, where you start thinking, well, there's weight here. There's a good cast there. We have Kirstie Alley in there, who was mid Cheers fame at that time. Had done Look Who's Talking.
She did Look Who's Talking, Romancing the Stone.
Yeah.
She was kind of on the tail end of her first big run.
Yeah. But look, here's the thing. I never liked her character in this. I really, and you're not meant to like her, but I didn't engage with her either. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are people that you love to hate on screen, and she comes in as this kind of, not that she's a cigar chomping kind of sergeant, but she comes across with this brash cigar chomping attitude to her that just didn't fit with her natural persona on screen, right?
It's a very American. It's like, that's one of the elements where it feels very American.
Yeah,
it's this kind of this government bigwig coming in with her cigarettes and her kind of just kind of dangerous attitude, where it's just like, oh yeah, she's not afraid of these kids.
No.
Who keep on doing weird and creepy things.
Yeah.
And gets like a pretty good. I bet there's so many little glimpses in this of like when you were mentioning the horror in it.
Yeah.
Because it's weird. I kind of sit on the fence of like thinking of this as a sci-fi or a horror. It's kind of in between. Because honestly, it doesn't have to be extraterrestrials with this.
No, no.
I mean, the name that they kind of go with, Village of the Damned. It's like, is this the devil? Are these Satan's children who are all coming through? And also, it's. Watching this movie in the beginning, when we get that scene where everyone starts fainting, everyone starts dropping down unconscious. I love this. I love this in the original. I love this in the book. I love this even in this movie.
Yeah.
And for me, it is. It kind of tickles a part of the lizard brain that is the same thing that kind of freaks out whenever I watch Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And there's a town like it's like an active town square and everyone just stops.
Yeah.
It's this kind of thing where I kind of don't even understand why we like flash mobs, because really, like, flash mobs are inherently terrifying. This thing where you realize, I am not in on this. As a viewer, even though we see everyone dropped off and we don't even have a surrogate like in Body Snatchers who witnesses it. We are the witness in this.
Yes.
And the terror in that is being like, I am not in this tribe. Whatever this is something that I am alone in. That I am just witnessing. And I think it inherently just injects so much danger into your lizard brain. Because it's something's going weird with this.
Something needs, yeah.
But in terms of jumping into what some of the kind of shortcomings of this film, and an example of how it doesn't really kind of dig much further into the surface. This isn't the first film of John Carpenter's where we've kind of got to know a community.
Yeah.
Big Thing with The Fog, to a kind of smaller scale, The Thing.
Yeah.
Even like Big Trouble in Little China. It's like getting to know like a corner of the world. And even Prince of Darkness, which we both talked about too. There's that collective and that community, and again, it's a small community again of scientific experts.
but even that is believable. That group is believable,
Yes.
you know. So
you don't get to know these characters.
no,
you really do not. And part of it's like, yeah, the characters that don't have much to kind of differentiate themselves, other than purely surface tension. But as soon as we get past the kind of opening where we're like, yeah, this person, you know, this one person is a realtor, you know, this person's a doctor, this person's a teacher, this person's this. As soon as we get past the day out, the kind of the daytime blackout, none of that means anything. None of that means anything. It doesn't add to character. It does not add to kind of anything. And a frustration for this is also just how few kids there are. There are so little in the book. It's 30. It's 30 of each. So it's 60.
Oh, wow, okay.
60 pregnancies.
Okay.
Whereas this, it's really small. It is because the whole idea is the whole town blacks out, and every woman who is able to grow a child inside of them is pregnant.
Yes.
Is impregnated. Every single one.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's when you get this small town where 60 women are all pregnant at the same time, which is this other element of horror of the, you know, speaking into this kind of Stepford Wives in terms of this thing where, you know, it would be, you know, it's like looking at a cult. It's like just to have like a day in the life of while all of these women are pregnant and just going through the street and seeing all of, like, every woman you see is pregnant.
Yes.
That's something that wouldn't have taken much for that. Like that's a well that isn't tapped at all. They speed through it so quickly into getting the kids kind of born. And they kind of don't get to miss the you know, the inherent terror of pregnancy.
Yes.
Which other, you know, plenty of other horror films have kind of delved into, you know, I mean, Alien for one, like this idea of like, I do not know what is inside of me.
Yeah.
I wanted more kids. There's so few of them.
Yeah, and I guess like I think I may have had this conversation with Ant as well, when to throw in a similar kind of not to the great. I get it. And first and foremost, completely identify with what you're saying and agree. But when we look at family units, like, so if you look at The Conjuring, for example, the real story that's based on, there's like something like 5 kids. We only really get to then see properly like 3 of them, and essentially that even gets boiled down to the main girl and the young boy, right? Because arguably the human attention is that we can't focus on too many people. And so if we're looking at something grand scale like that, how do you present that on screen without losing the message, but also losing focus on, all right, so who am I following here? Because you have to follow the narrative at some point, which then means you have to go smaller to then go larger again. But by the time you've gone smaller, you're already a fair way into telling that narrative. So then how do you then go out without losing focus, right? And I'm not saying it can't be done. Like, you just got to be smart about it, right? So,
well, I thought, I was like, do you do this as a mini series? But really, it's like, this isn't a mini series. Like, there's not enough variety in it. No. Like, for you to get that much kind of info with it. But really, I think the way to do that is and you know, this film is based on both the book and the screenplay of the 60s version.
Yes.
So they do take an element which they really playing into David and having this kind of humanized kind of alien child that they really kind of lean into with this one, and is really kind of what they kind of pin the whole thing on. But I think if you have more children, the children are not characters. are not multiple characters. They are
No.
one character.
Yeah.
Even though in the book it's very much there are two hive minds of the male and the female are separate hive minds.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, and I think in the original, it's all just one. All of the children all kind of share the one brain.
Yes, that's right. But we've got to be careful, though, that you don't go into Tim Burton's Oompa Loompa territory with that, because that could be horrific. Actually, that could be actually quite.
I mean, isn't that what we want here? Isn't this?
Yeah,
Don't we want some more horror?
Yeah. Look, you're right. Look, it could have been played with in a lot more depth, but look, I don't know. You do wonder by this point, and maybe while we're chatting, I'll kind of see if I can find some comments from Carpenter himself on this, because it'd be interesting to see how he viewed it after the fact. Because look, there's nothing shit about this film per se, but it's not fantastic either, right? It feels like it treads water enough to get you from A to B, right? And I don't not often tip my hat in my opinion of the film until we get to the end, but it felt very much like that. And I think one of the reasons I'm saying it quite early is because I do liken it quite, and I do compare it straight away to the 1960 film, because I do have a lot of love for that film. And even when I rewatched the 1960 film ahead of the podcast chat that we're having now, I'm like, it's a really good film for something that's like, what are we now, 60 years old now. It's still pretty good. Like, it's still really quite a solid film. And, you know, to jump to the climax of the film, it ramps up the tension really nicely. It doesn't overplay it. It just handles it very kind of straight on, where you don't know, is the character Professor actually going to be able to succeed in carrying through with this, or will it be one of those, you know, sour end moments where humanity is destroyed, right? So, you know, we're left with that cliffhanger before obviously the final reveal where it unfolds. So yeah, look, so it's an interesting one. But look, what this particular version of the film does have at odd points in the film is actually really cool comedy humor moments in it, which some are laugh out loud when it happens, and some are only laugh out loud when you are like us looking back at it and reviewing it. And I'll go more to what I mean by the latter of those, in that one of the earlier characters we see is the guy who's the
janitor.
Is he the janitor? No, not the janitor dude. No, I always think of it. So he crops up in They Live as well. But he always strikes me as I keep meaning to look up it's the same actor, but you know, crazy drunk driver from Back to the Future. I don't know if it's the same dude or not. He looks very similar. Anyway, so where was I going with that? Digressions, tangents. So no, the main guy he's the one of the early kills in it. He's unaffected by the actual incident because he, like Christopher Reeve's character, has gone out of town, and he's the husband of Linda's character. Is it Linda Kozlowski's character? Is it, or am I?
Yes.
Linda. Is it hers, or is it the lady that was in Crocodile Dundee, starring alongside our very own Paul Hogan? Linda Kozlowski. I want to say so, but if I've got that wrong, I apologise. Anyway, look, my point though was more about there's a line he says. He's with the lady anyway, and he's driving, and they're driving around. He's one of the early characters we see, and I think he's smoking, and she says something like, you know, I really wish you'd quit those things. And his line to her is, the day I quit smoking will be the day that you bear me a child. And ironically enough, the day that she is born, or when it becomes impregnated, is the day that he stops smoking, because he dies, right? Yeah. And after the fact, I laughed quite loudly at that, because I was like, that's actually quite cool. I actually like that, even though that may have gotten missed by a lot of the average punters out there who were just watching the film for the sake of the film. But we're here to dissect it, so I was like, that was actually kind of cool. But yeah, so his character is killed quite early on, because so he comes back and there's a big kind of
straight into
a big petrol tanker thing, and
yeah,
and blows up. Which is kind of cool, because I didn't like his character. I thought he was a bit arrogant, and I wondered how they were going to play that, because the whole point of the book is that there is this one character who is absent from the town itself and comes back into the town now, and that's Christopher Reeve's character. So he's the one person who's not aware of what's happening, and he's our eyes as the audience as we go through the journey. Now, in the 1960s version, that wasn't actually done by the professor's equivalent. This was the professor's brother-in-law, from memory, who he's in the army, and he kind of comes in on that kind of perspective. So they've kind of weaved those two characters a little bit together in this one.
We get our viewpoint character, which is still like iconic in this, and in all of the versions of the line painted on the road, with like, you know, the cows asleep in the field, and it was I think it was a bus in the other one, and and it's just a truck in this one, and the image of them putting a canary, you know, it's the old canary in the coal mine, on a big rod, as they kind of push it through and just see it drop down. And as they pull it back, it kind of jumps back up. Which is so fascinating. Like that's such a like an engrossing idea of like what's going on. This perfectly defined, perfectly defined border that is just on this town. And in the book, as well as the 60s version, they put some air power into it and have an airplane kind of going over.
I love both those elements.
Yes, which they don't have in this. We don't like I kind of don't, as we were kind of saying before, I don't really get a good sense of this town.
No.
I don't know where it is in relation to the rest of civilization. It like seems like big. It doesn't feel terribly small. You know, it has all of these kind of different elements. I mean, even just the you know, you have the realtors showing like a couple from out of town, which is just this horrifying idea of like the fact that you are in this town on this day, being like, that's when we had to do it. We had to go. And, you know, I mean, them as a character, like that's an interesting dynamic that, you know, would have been nice. But I'll refrain from all of the characters we could have got to know. In this story. But yeah, this kind of bordering idea, and then everything starts waking up, and everyone starts waking up, and we kind of get another.
Yeah, it's it's that kind of dome kind of idea, you know, like because that's the whole point, you know, with the
height,
you know, and they were testing that, and in the 60s version, you have the airplane pilot kind of go test that level and crash, and which is all really, really cool. I'm instantly reminded, actually, probably not in a good way, of the Australian film called Undead, or The Undead, which was the first film from the Spielberg brothers. Came out 2003, I want to say, something like that. But it's a similar kind of idea where there's the small town and they all kind of become infected. And in that case, zombie-like kind of characteristics. But playing with that like very small village and contained in this dome idea, so people outside of it are not infected. And there is a reveal that happens at the end of that, which we won't go into too much detail in this particular podcast. But yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit of that kind of, and it's been played with a lot, where whether they're being protected for some reason or isolated for some reason. Now, the other bit I wanted to go to with the humour side of it is, so obviously we're presented with this town, and you know they all kind of drop down in the middle of what looks like a bit of a fate kind of thing that's about to happen.
The school fair. It's where most of the town people are.
That's right. So they're all kind of congregating at this thing when this event happens, and everyone kind of drops down. Which, when you watch it too, that moment still has an impact. You're just like, what's just happened? This is insane. But the best bit is when they slowly come to again, when everything comes about. And to me, still is the funniest moment in the film, where we pan round and we see the dude that's passed out on top of the barbecue and has been there the whole time and has cooked himself to a crisp. It is hilarious. It's a great moment in the film.
We just cut away. It's a great element. Like, you don't need to see that tells you enough of, like, probably some people died, but also that's kind of quite a funny one to do. And I caught it in the big shot when everyone kind of drops down. I saw him drop down. I was like, is that on the barbecue or is that next? And the fact that it's kind of there in a bit of a Where's Waldo moment. And you cut back and he's been there for 8 hours. Is pretty funny.
I loved it, and it's probably the best bit of the movie, which says a lot about the movie. But I thought it was so good, and I just kind of wish there was more of that. I guess that's what it was. It was missing a lot of that fun element to it.
Flair,
too. Like,
personality.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're talking there's not a lot of horror element in it either, and it's devoid of a lot of emotion, which is weird for a film about these creatures that have come who are devoid of emotion. Like, what, it's, I don't know what it's trying to say there. So part of me, when I'm rewatching this back, I'm kind of thinking it starts to feel like Carpenter's ringing this in a big way. And you're like, but you've done remakes before, and you've done them really well. So what's going on?
You've done one of the best.
Exactly. And it's just to me, that's what I'm saying. I haven't looked deeper enough myself to kind of see what Carpenter says on this. And I will in as we kind of delve through it. But yeah, I just was, I think it was one of the things that nagged me a lot through this film. They rally through this sequence of events, and then we have that incident happening, and I'm going to be a bit like this. I'm going to kind of truck through this film a little bit, because we are kind of bouncing around. Oops, keep knocking my mic. I'll say that again. We keep kind of bouncing around a lot, which is fine. So with the narrative, so to speak, I'm just kind of I'll bounce through, and we'll maybe riff off things if we feel like it. We want to give that more attention. But yeah, so we have that first moment. The fact these people are pregnant. We have Kirstie Alley's character coming in, who's employed by the government in some degree to oversee this strange phenomena. Think X-Files, but not so cool.
That's what it is. That's what they're going for. Is they're going for X-Files, but just not as cool.
Yeah, she's no Mulder or Scully. Let's put it this way. She's meant to be a hybrid of the two, I think, maybe, but maybe with the attitude of Skinner's character to boot. Anyway, look, it's interesting. So she's coming into play too, but she's also present at the town meeting where they're discussing this strange anomaly where all these women are pregnant. And there's a moment where Kirstie Alley's character says, "We will fund if we're not. I'm not going to make you have these children, but if you choose to have them, then you will be ably supported." And there's this great bit where there's a male character whose wife and daughter are both pregnant, and he's like, "Well, what happens here? Because I've got 2 people in my family that are pregnant. Do we get 2 lots of the money?" Which
it was $3,000 a family.
Yeah. Which
he
is,
says,
yeah,
it'll be $6,000.
Yeah.
He just looks to them saying,
well done.
That's an element of that personality. Like that, like there are just these little moments where you're like, that could have been the movie. It could have been more kind of almost parody, almost like a kind of heightened comedy version.
Yeah, anything to kind of give this a little bit of grit or something to chew on. There's there's a lot of fat there that's just not being chewed on. So that was kind of a cool moment within that sequence. And then I feel like I'm missing a moment I was going to touch on as well. With the pregnancy stage. Oh, yeah, look, there's a moment where we learn that one of the women is a virgin and she's pregnant, which is also done in the original 1960s version, and I feel like handled it a lot more, maybe because that was a bit more taboo. But there's that moment in the 60s version where she's weeping, saying, "It's impossible, I tell you. It can't be true. I've not slept with anyone." Whereas this is a bit more underplayed, where she doesn't really let on that she's not, it's very, low key.
She has a little scene with Mark Hamill.
Mark Hamill, who we haven't mentioned yet. Mark Hamill's in this
Hamill's in this movie
as the religious presence in the film.
Yeah, he's our minister. He's our minister in the in this film, which I think is a great use of Mark Hamill.
I think it's a great because let's face it, he knows how to wax lyrical in films. There's a reason he's become a great voice actor more recently. In a lot of things, because he has a great way of playing with words and making it sound really fantastic. And that's no different here, but he unfortunately feels really underused in this film. Like, you want to see more of his character and his deliberations about this strange thing that's going on, more so because of his character arc and the complexity that he goes to by its conclusion. When you watch the film, it feels like he's gone from this point of view to this other point of view, and we haven't seen that journey in between. He's just one extreme or the other, and we're just like, that would have been interesting to watch that journey for him, particularly as somebody of religious background. Like, really, what are we playing with here? Like, going back to what you were saying, like the Village of the Damned. Like, is this ungodly stuff that's happening right now? Like, what are we playing with here? And it would have been really fascinating to use somebody of his talent in a better way, but it wasn't done. So anyway, that's another like, we're starting to get a sense of how aggravated I was getting as we're going through this film, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway,
I'm right here with you.
Yeah. Okay, so we have all that kind of stuff going on too, with the girl that's the virgin, but we also have the what was the other? I know we spoke about the young girl that was also pregnant. So there are elements of some of these characters that are at play. Oh, and we do get the lady whose husband has been away for a mathematically impossible degree that she could be pregnant. And even that isn't played as well as it does in the 1960s version.
What's confusing, like in this one, it's confusing because we kind of go from like extreme kind of feelings of the situation to straight to them at a party, and it's them all kind of looking. No one looks pregnant. It must be soon, but not too soon. Because it's enough time after one of the big deaths that we've had that people are kind of okay. And then there's the line of like, how did you feel? Like that you'd be a father after being away in Japan for a year.
Yeah.
And so it's not really like it timeline wise, it's misplaced because by this time we know everyone is pregnant.
Yes.
That like the moment, like they need to be one of the first people to find out that they're pregnant.
Yes,
for it to have the impact. Otherwise, it's like, why is he freaking out? Because even the virgin is pregnant. Even like it's no, like he doesn't. Why would he think that?
Why would he think?
Why would he think? Just this kind of gruff looking, like.
It's a strange. There's a lot of things that are handled strangely in this, and to me, it's the party scene in particular is a weird one because it's almost like a whispered comment that the Linda character drops on and goes, "Oh, hold on a minute." But yeah, so it's so weird, like, you know, and I don't know why this jumped to my mind, but because it's not horror related, but the film The Graduate, Dustin Hoffman, there's the scene early on where he's walking through, again, a very kind of it's a party scene, and he keeps getting these whispers of people talking or odd comments or that. It's not even like a throwaway thing like that. It's just a very weirdly placed position piece of dialogue to explain this person's predicament. Very strange, very odd. So we have that in the mix too. And then then we kind of like to jump ahead to the next kind of big moment is obviously when these women are about to have their babies, right? And
all at the same time.
All at the same time. So like clockwork, exactly. Now, which does bring me to one of the elements I kind of did like, in that one of the women has a stillborn baby, or so we're led to believe. It's never really they say it is, but it's never really.
Yeah, Kirstie Alley kind of wraps it up in a shirt.
Yeah,
it kind of runs out the door,
runs away. But she expertly delivers said entity / baby, and then we kind of find out the result of that being right towards the end. But yeah, so look. But what I liked about it was that it's the early signs that whatever that they are facing isn't entirely unbeatable or unconquerable. There is potential weakness there, which
That's
I can't.
Very good point.
I kind of liked that element there played in it. And for me, we were talking about the misplacement of the other bit earlier with the girl being pregnant, but that moment felt right, and it felt like okay, whatever they're dealing with is odd, but hold on, there's somewhat, and it's never really explored why. So if we go down the avenue that let's take it for granted that this entity is stillborn, right? It's never explored why that happens in this moment. Whether it should have done or not, I don't know. But I kind of, again, would have mind learning a little bit more about that to kind of go, what is it about? And explore the, to carry a child for 9 months.
Which is also an element.
Yeah.
Because that they don't carry the babies for 9 months.
No.
In the original and in the book, whereas this is not really clear in terms of timeline.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire thing, and that's part of the creep in the original.
Yeah,
is the fact of being like, these babies have come to kind of a full term way quicker than normally. They grow quicker. In the book, they at 8 years old they are physically about 16 years old, which they obviously don't go to as an extreme. Taking more so from the film adaptation and the fact that small children are creepier. But even that fact of we only kind of really get it when one of the babies spells out their name after just being a baby. They spell out their name with blocks, and the mother's like, you shouldn't be able to do that. You can't do that. You spelled your name.
Yeah.
It's,
no, that's cool. I forgot where we were going with that. Now, what were we saying? Sorry.
It was carrying, like the whole element of carrying a baby for 9 months.
Yeah, for 9 months. So yes, you're right. In this degree, we don't know if that's exactly the case. But even the concept of carrying a child has such an impact on the body, both physically and mentally, on the lady that's carrying the baby. And so I feel like there could be more to explore with the idea of the psychological impact that has on a person that has to do that and have the baby. So even the weird notion of this thing not being a human or this unknown thing, there is because they play with it. Like Linda Kozlowski's character plays with, like, she has this connection with this David entity, right? And it's a bit easier because he's the nice one. But it's I reckon there could have been a lot more to play with like with a bit more of the polar opposites of that, or see, maybe that's saying something about me. I'm fascinated with how the human psyche responds to situations, and when films play with that and deal with it really well, I'm gripped. So I feel like, if we're going to go back to the horror kind of component of it, that would have been a really interesting thing to play with, and to kind of watch her descent, because, like, she's clearly suicidal, and the only person that sees that is the David character later on too, and he recognizes that she has this moment of loss, and because the baby that she would have given birth to was supposed to be his partner, or his yin to yang. This, because the idea is that these, in this version, that they're paired up, presumably to breed for life, or however. It's never really, it's only hinted at, as in, like, that they are paired off for some reason. So he in himself is a lost entity, the David character, and feels like he has no connection with his own kind because of that. I just felt like a lot more could have been played with that. But anyway, look, that's the avenue that they've gone down, and that's what we get dealt with. The next kind of big chunk is then how these kids, starting off from when they're infants, so how they kind of start interacting, and they start showing these psychic powers within it, and we have the moment where so I was just looking at his name, Dr. Alan Chafee, which is Christopher Reeve's character. So he is with his wife, and there's that moment where she, I think this is orange eye moment, I want to say, where the child is watching her and then puts her into a translucent state to the point where she sticks her arm in a boiling...
with the soup. Big pot of soup. It's when she gives their child soup and it's too hot.
Yes.
And the baby kind of, the toddler reacts of like,
Yeah.
And
I'll show you.
Yes. These kind of petulant children who really play tit for tat to the most extreme degree. And when you get the other friend coming over with her little alien baby, which is great, and she kind of hears her screaming and runs up to her and pulls her out, and she just keeps on wanting to put it back in, which is another one of those little elements where you're like, that's pretty great. That's pretty.
It's a great moment. And I think that's the thing. There's so many. When the beats happen, they're great, but it's the bits where the off beats, which are long and a bit wistful, that we don't really we can't then, it's like throwing a bone down, and we're like, oh cool, yeah, we'll chase after the bone, and then you're just like left to go, well, you're towed along for ages before they throw another bone at you, and so anyway, like it feels quite tedious, I felt like, and I just really struggled to engage with it a lot of these moments. But this was, as quite rightly, like you said, one of those rare beats, and even the impact that then that has on her character is interesting. Although I felt like, again, it would have been good to have gone a bit more in deep. Like it jumped straight from that moment. Yes, she goes down a very dark line of her character descent, goes down this right dark journey. But we go from suddenly seeing it all from Christopher Reeve's point of view again. that it feels like we're deliberately being removed from that pain, you know. And even the moment where, so we see her character standing on the edge of the cliff, and you know she's going to jump, and it seems like it takes an age for Christopher Reeve to go, she's looking a bit forlorn today. Oh, never mind, I'll come back later. And like within a beat later, she's gone, and you're like, well, yeah, like. Anyway, he's meant to be a doctor, and he doesn't see these things in his own wife.
Yeah,
God damn you.
We don't even get. Yeah, we don't kind of get the because I think it's a story with so much dramatic potential.
Yeah.
And we don't really go into the drama. We don't really go into the human drama between all of the people who are experiencing this thing, which I think is the ultimate kind of downfall. We don't really get many great conversations between people. We kind of just get table dressing, you know, with Mark Hamill's priest character, the minister. His transition from, you know, where he starts to where he ends, which is with a rifle trying to shoot one of these kids. The only kind of transition we get is his partner or the church assistant. I don't know whether I guess he is a priest. He's a like a Catholic priest. So it's just kind of his his church helper. Who he kind of becomes a surrogate partner to, and is the one kind of holding her hand when she's giving birth. When she dies, we get one scene where he's kind of preaching, and he's kind of turning on the nasty of like, these are evil
sermon.
Children. Whereas we don't get a human kind of, you know, you just need to pick a couple of those characters. There are tons of characters. You pick a couple and get them to have that conversation, particularly that conversation of a man of God. A man of God who's like, where like these are his congregation, because that's dramatic. It's a horrific idea. This whole idea of brood parasites of another species dropping their young off to be raised by these stooges. And for these for these cuckoo birds that grow fast and they grow quick and they push out the rest of the babies and they just completely kind of absorb their kind of adoptive parents and totally use them. That's interesting. And that is an element that isn't kind of really kind of gone into. There's so much that's not gone into.
No, you're right. It's there's so much that they could have. There's so many. I wonder if there was moments. I don't know. What am I trying to say? Like, I think maybe they just didn't know how to condense that kind of material into a feature-length piece.
It's a lot. It is a challenge.
It's because there's a lot. There is a lot there, and I get why you were saying about the comment a little while back about the miniseries thing, but I don't know. Like, you just make it a longer movie, you know?
Yeah, it's not a long movie. It's just shy of 100 minutes.
Yeah. You could probably pack it out a lot more, and really take the time and invest in these characters. We're recording this at a time when The Haunting of Bly Manor has not long been out. Before I continue, have you watched that yet?
I have not.
Okay, so all I'll say on it then is that it's a very heavily character-driven piece, right? And it spends a lot of time on that, in my opinion, in a good way. And I'm biased probably because I think I really love Mike Flanagan anyway, and I love what he does, particularly with characters. And I feel like if you spend a bit more time investing in the characters in a similar way that show does here, you could potentially have had a much better film as a result, rather than like flirtily playing with the notion that these people have the potential for a three-dimensional, multi-dimensional personality rather than the two-dimensional ones that are at hand. I think you have an acting background, Oscar, and I think you would identify with that there's so many characters here that have the potential to have gone deeper with, to play with, and we again going back to the talent that we have on screen. Particularly, I want to mention Christopher Reeve. Like he's a very good actor. Could have done so much more, and it just is never. They just aren't given enough to play with. I feel, which is a shame, because you go back to the source material that we're talking about, which is rich in this material, to have done something with it. So it's very. Yeah, so very, very weird. And so we have these, I think the focus is so much on these kids. Let's just make this focus on these kids being these weird things, right? And that's why we jump right to this moment where all of a sudden they're a little bit older, and then the rest of the movie plays out that they are this kind of presence. It's a lot of it centered around, like, they do seem to have a leader of the group, which is I want to say her name was Mara. Yeah. Who's
Christopher
Reeve's daughter, yeah. And she's suitably bitchy and good in this. Like, there's no fault to the child actress playing the role. I thought she was very good at it. But it does, it does feel like, going back again to what you were saying about the small number of children that are present. Like, we have the David character and his opposite in Mara, as far as good versus evil, to paint it really black and white. And there's a couple of other offhanders, another boy and another girl that probably you could go, they sort of toe the line. And then, maybe a couple of others that aren't prominent at all, but they're just kind of there to make the 6 or 7 or 8 of them look kind of menacing as they walk through a town together. So it's kind of very, a weird couple of moments there, and there's a few things that they go through. That Christopher Reeve's character, as we mentioned, has to go through the complexities of realizing this his child, who's the leader of the group, and how to combat this thing. He doesn't want anything to do. He starts to distance himself away from it. And Linda Kozłowski's character, who is the principal of the school, is like, we need somebody of your integrity. And you're like, do we? Because you haven't shown any integrity so far.
To teach them humanity. That's what he needs to do. Yeah. Even though he hasn't, like, that's not been a thing where you're like, he's the most human of them all. Like, what a mind. He's been, like, relatively like a relatively like a straight-laced, like, doctor.
And you're like, well, that's the thing. He hasn't shown much humanity in himself. It's so weird. But something that and again, forgive me for jumping around as well. But there's that great scene with the optometrist as well, which I nearly forgot about, where she accidentally, again, it's that tit for tat thing that we were talking about earlier. So she accidentally puts the wrong thing in one of the girl's eyes because she knocks the bottle over there, similar, and so the girl then kind of basically forces her to pour a whole load of this liquid into her eyes, blinding her, as in like the optometrist's eyes, and blinding her. Which is kind of a cool moment. But there is another moment a little bit later where we do learn, I think it's through Kirstie Alley's character. So her character is Dr. Susan Werner. But we learn through her that there are other colonies in other countries across the world and these countries are starting to eliminate these children because they cause a threat or are dangerous or other such, like, and I think that is mentioned in the 60s version as well.
Yes, it's a big thing in the book. It's a big thing in the 60s. There's a place in Australia, which is always nice. Yay! It makes me kind of like, woo, we get mentioned. You get Canada. It's like an Inuit tribe in kind of the Canadian Arctic. There's a small township in the Northern Territory in Australia, and then there's a Mongolian village. And for various reasons, they've kind of like those colonies of these children have failed.
Yes.
Like one of them, I think it's the Inuits. They kind of like leans into kind of like they kind of get rid of the children really early on because they're like, these aren't like they're like these are crazy people.
Yeah.
Whereas in the English are like, I guess we'll just look after them, of course,
It's a very sweeping statement to these stereotypes that these nationalities like. It's a very like I can say this being English, right? But the English are renowned for like that whole kind of like be polite, even
in the face of
it's okay. I'm sure we'll deal with it, darling. Have a cup of tea and. It's like, but we're losing the war. It's fine. It'll be all right.
Just keep calm. Keep calm and carry on.
Keep calm and carry on. Yeah. Just sweep that under the carpet, will you, darling? Thank you. It's a very the stiff upper lip thing. Yeah, for sure. And
there's a Russian.
The Russian
ones,
yeah,
the Russians who are the ones who. They bomb the town.
They bomb because Cold War, which was around the time the 60s one was. When did the book come out, actually, by the way?
Book was late 50s. It was
late
about
50s.
57, 58.
Yeah, so Cold War. Okay, so that's very topical within that. And obviously the bomb element being significant too in all versions. So we do learn about this kind of stuff too, and I am going to kind of start, as I said, burning through this really, really quite quickly now. But we have the Dr. Susan Werner character who then is approached by the children at the her laboratory, and this is where David's there, the good child is there. And that's where we see the stillborn baby is still preserved in its natural form, and that she's been keeping it secret all this time because she, performed that autopsy and studied it because she's a scientist, and that's what scientists do.
She's a government scientist.
She's a government scientist, yeah.
She's secrets as well.
Yes.
This little like very alien baby.
Yeah.
Big eyes. Classic. Yeah. Classic looking alien.
Yes. And so we have this moment, and then she ends up being forced onto the slab and sliced open in an autopsy of the children's doing while she's very much alive, which I kind of like. As another kind of cool moment. Could have probably pushed the ratings a little higher a bit and gone a bit more gory, perhaps, in that element. But I liked the fact that she got her comeuppance. It was a good moment. And at the same time, we have a mob of angry people with pitchforks and very kind of like
flaming torches.
As they kind of are about to descend upon the children, and at which point the children again use their powers and they make the leader of the mob, the woman, basically kind of get doused in petrol and set on fire, and goes down in a flame of fire and killed. Then things get crazy. We get like the and the kids are being dropped off at this point too, aren't they? They basically, I've missed the point. They've moved to this big hut barn thing in the middle of
the abandoned
dairy farm kind of. Imagine where cows would have been kept or something like that, on the outskirts. And so they've been living as their own little community outside of the village community for a little while. And this is where we get in the climax of the film, essentially, as it's coming ahead. We have the state police and National Guards brought in, but again, the kids use their powers to get them to kind of kill each other as in the National Guards and state police kill each other in a full blown out gun battle, essentially, where they're all killing each other. But good old Alan Christopher Reeve has come up with a cunning plan where he has explosives in his briefcase, which he brings into the children's classroom. And he's come to in a very similar way again, and maybe you can tell me if the book does the same thing, but in the 60s version, the professor, towards the latter end before the climax, learns that he can probably block out their thoughts. If he in the 60s version, he thinks of a brick wall. In this version, Christopher Reeve's version, character does think of the ocean, I think, instead.
Mm-hmm. He first thinks of the ocean and then thinks of the brick wall.
Yeah, so that plays with this idea. Like, he comes across the idea of, if I think long and hard enough and visualize something else, they can't read what I'm actually thinking. So he goes off as that. Well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep this. I've got this bomb in this briefcase, and I'm going to blow them up and kill them all. But I'm going to hide.
A classic bomb. It's
bomb.
Sticks of dynamite, and it's an alarm clock detonator.
There's a bomb on the plane. A bomb? No, not a bomb. A bomb. Sorry, quoting Flying High too. So it is. It's that whole kind of I don't know where does that concept come from? Anyway, I don't know. I don't know the first thing about making a bomb. Maybe that's what they all look like.
Sticks of dynamite.
Sticks of dynamite with a clock on it. And it didn't go off. Anyway, so he has one of those in his briefcase, and at the same time, Linda Kozlowski's character Jill, I want to say, is she still has this attachment to David. She wants to try and save him, and so he initially locks her up in this, I want to say, the school office. She manages to free herself, gets there anyway, turns up, and he's like, "Oh, for fuck's sake!" And she, there's a moment where the kids are like, "Well, something's going on. What are you hiding?" The Jill character is trying to lure David away. David's caught between the two because these are his kind, and yet he's realizing that he doesn't know if he's kind of are the sort of people he wants to hang out with if they're about killing out genocide and a whole race of people. But anyway, look, Jill is able to manage to get David out, and the kids then focus on Alan's character, like, what's going on, what are you hiding, and trying to really push into the backs of his mind to find out what's going on. We see that kind of the walls starting to crumble. That's the vision in his mind. And we get to the point where they realize that there's an explosive in his briefcase at that moment, and it's too late because everyone blows up, killing everyone in the barn, including Alan. And then we get the final scene where we see Jill and David, who survived the massacre, and she's driving off and saying they'll start up somewhere new. We'll move to where nobody knows them. And we have this close-up shot of David as they're riding off in the car as he's looking off in the distance.
What is that? What is that moment? What is that? Because it's not like it's a sinister moment. It's not like, I almost expected him to kind of smile. Like that kind of thing. It's a really kind of weird tone that when it happened, I was like, what am I supposed to think is going to happen? Are they going to be happy and we're away and they'll have a chance at a normal life? Like, is that what I'm supposed to think of it?
I don't think they knew either. I think that's the thing. I think that says a lot about the script in general. It's like they knew they had something here, but it's almost like forgive me, I do keep going to the 1960 version, but to use that for a moment, because we're talking 35 years after the film, that's probably enough breathing space to try and recreate what is deemed a classic, not even just a classic film, but a classic novel. But it just felt like they didn't. To me, it felt like they didn't. Maybe was it because that film was such a prominent film that it just felt like, were they too scared to push it somewhere, or was it one of those things where to use an analogy where, you're trying to go into the ocean for the first time. It's a little bit cold, but I could go in there, or should I not? I don't know. And it's kind of like the film feels like that the whole way through. It's just never brave enough to just dive in and play with the source material. It's all very above the surface stuff. Yeah.
It's going through the motions of I guess we'll remake it. And I don't view like this story as particularly like sacred. Like it's the same thing with like Body Snatchers. I'm like, I want like with sci-fi if it's a great kind of human story, that is something that is kind of quite kind of fundamentally about our psyche and kind of plays on something with that. I am all for being like, I mean, every while and then, maybe have another crack and like have it be a little bit of an update, or, like let get to explore another side of that in today's kind of context. And, I wouldn't be against another crack at Village of the Damned. I reckon Blumhouse would probably do a fucking amazing version. Like,
well, the way they're going at the moment, I wouldn't be surprised if they do. Like, particularly they have. I mean, I know it's not Carpenter's original film, but they now have a relationship with Carpenter. So, who knows? Like, the way they're churning out some of these films at the moment with a modern audience, who knows? I think. Like what, 95? What do we say, 95? We're talking like another 35 years again, nearly. So yeah, who knows? It could be right for another. And like again, like we you can tell the way we're talking that we're very passionate about the original source, right? So like, that says a lot about the fact that there's a lot to play with. It's a malleable kind of storyline that you can do a lot from, and. Yeah, I just feel like there's a few things there that it could have served a lot more to have tried to, they reference the stuff I'm reading from here does reference the remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers 1978 as like, an example of what they were trying to go with, in the sense that it can be done, like the 1950s version of the Body Snatchers. And then the Donald Sutherland version that was so good, and it's still rated highly in my books as one of the best sci-fi horror films ever. And so it can be done. These elements, there's similar kind of tonally kind of things can be done and played with. And the producer, Lawrence Buckman, he was the head of MGM. Apparently, I think in 1980 was said that the film could be made again, and could do the book properly, like 20 years ago. So obviously he's referencing the 60s film. You couldn't talk about things like abortion or censorship. Didn't even allow you to even mention impregnation. So all those things could have been played with a lot more in this 95 version. And they didn't go there. Like, and I want to then, like, this is another film, not a film, sorry, the Masters of Horror series that kind of came out in the mid 2000s, where they were a handful of horror auteurs, John Carpenter being one of them, and they did like these little short episodes. I'll say short, they're like just shy of an hour. And he did one called Pro-Life, right? Which was the concept of it was like determined to rescue his pregnant daughter from an abortion clinic, a religious fanatic and his sons plan a violent assault just as the doctors suspect a pregnancy might not be of this world. Just reading that synopsis alone, right? Oh, that's what Village of the Damned could have been done to a wider degree, like, so it's obviously an area that fascinates Carpenter. So it just was Pro-Life then his way of apologizing for not tackling such a taboo thing and leaving it a bit later on? I don't know. I could be putting 2 and 2 together and making 7. But I just found that interesting when I was rewatching it this time around. Like, yeah, like it's not like he couldn't have done it. Like he obviously or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he wasn't bold enough, dare I say, to go there until a lot later in his career, when society was being a bit more acceptable about talking about these things. But usual, like he's always got Carpenter always has a very specific thing in mind. Like a lot of people say this about him as a film director. He always knows what he wants to shot, and actors who've worked with him say, yeah, he just knew, right, this is where I needed to be, this, that, and the other. And it's the same kind of thing here. So as far as shooting the film, he obviously had a clear vision in his mind. But I don't know, do we come back to then talking about the script again? Like, I'm just looking at the comment here. Carpenter talks about the script and said it's funny, but in all the drafts of the script he read to everybody, he was trying to go in a different direction from the old picture and the novel, and they avoided it being about an alien invasion. And he's like, but you've got to talk about the alien invasion and the roots of it. So maybe there's a bit of, for the way I'm reading that, does that mean that there's a bit of a conflict already going on between director and producers? Yeah. And he's
fatal studio notes.
Yeah, because even like
hamstrung.
Yeah, I'm reading this thing here again. Admittedly, I'm on Wikipedia at the moment, so take that with a grain of salt. But it says, like, a quote from Carpenter: "You don't have to do much to the original. You've got to bring it up to date, humanize it a little, and make the characters rich. When the original was made, you couldn't say the word pregnant on screen, so the birth scenes and the women weren't dealt with." So yes, he handles the birth. The birth scenes was actually quite interesting, but I find it ironic that he's saying, like, humanize it a little and make the characters rich, because I never got a wind of that coming across, or that for the way I interpreted it, that wasn't the way of how I watched the film.
Yeah, I don't think it comes across.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
So, but he does say, like, he apparently says that the marriage with the studio was a good one, same goals in mind. So that kind of contradicts a few things there. He's saying, like, here, it was fun to do a drama like in Village as opposed to In the Mouth of Madness, which had more edge to it. He's saying this is a bit more straight, a bit more baby boomer, middle class kind of movie. Yeah, maybe that's the thing. It's too middle of the road. It doesn't really offer anything, and maybe that's part of its problem too. It just ended up playing a little bit safe as a result.
What had he done? What was the film that he did prior to this?
So the film he did just prior to doing Village of the Damned was actually In the Mouth of Madness. So that's the one with Sam Neill. So that's the Lovecraftian kind of. Which to me,
do we know how that did, like, financially?
In the Mouth of Madness?
Yeah,
I can look that up. While I'm doing that, I will also have a quick look to see how Village of the Damned did financially. So Village of the Damned was made for 22 million, but domestically only made 9.4 million. So big flop in that respects. So then if we then look at John Carpenter's prior film, In the Mouth of Madness.
So with The Mouth of Madness was on a budget of about 8 million. So you double that for marketing. So yeah, you go 16. Its box office was 8.9 million. So another flop.
Oh, wow.
So even though, and I really like In the Mouth of Madness. It's
Me too.
Far from perfect, but like it's got so much going on.
There's pulse to it, though. There's a pulse. Do you know what I mean? So like it's
iconic. Like there are so many iconic images from it, and really kind of bold, swinging performance from Sam Neill, obviously losing his his mind. Whereas this does feel like a safer bet. Yeah. That I can see him being like, okay, we'll play it a little bit safer, a little bit more, bit more boomer, a bit more kind of less kind of insane. And I guess it did make a little bit, like it made barely more than Mouth of Madness. But yeah,
but it had a lot more money, thrown into it though, So
yeah,
and like I think I said on our In the Mouth of Madness record that, and I'm still standing by it. So we'll see as we obviously go through the last few films. But to me, In the Mouth of Madness, I really like In the Mouth of Madness, and for me, looking back at Carpenter's career, it was the last decent film he did, and yet we've got like four, including this one, 4 movies still to go. So, which says a lot. That's 1995. Yeah, that I think, or was it 95? Yeah, anyway, this is 1995 that this is made. But yeah, I just found, I really, even rewatching In the Mouth of Madness, I could easily rewatch it again. And with this one, I find I'm not necessarily inclined to, like, but who knows, in a few years down the track, I'll go, I haven't watched that for a while, I'll stick it back on again. Whereas I like, again, to talk about the 1960s version, I feel drawn to that one. I will quite happily stick that one on again. If it comes on the box, if they ever, any platform device happens to be streaming it, I own it anyway. But if I was, for argument's sake, upstairs in my living room watching something or looking for something to watch and that was there, I'd go, oh yeah, I'd give that a go. I feel like watching that. So I think, I don't know, I've been kind of praising the 60s version quite highly, and I'm aware of that. And I'm not one of those people that ordinarily will promote the original over the other. I'm always quite willing to give a remake a go. If we use the Body Snatchers one as an example, the 1958 Body Snatchers film is a very good film. The 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers film is arguably better in my opinion, but like some people believe it the other way. But a lot of people still rate Invasion of the Body Snatchers really highly. I'd even suffice to say that the Abel Ferrara version, Body Snatchers, which was in the 90s, that came out at a very similar time to this as well, was equally a watchable film. It's heavily flawed, don't get me wrong.
Very 90s.
Yeah, but if it's watchable. Okay, so the reason I'm doing that, I'm saying that deliberately because similar time frame to when this came out, and it feels like this film is really hard to watch. It's really hard to connect with, and at least the for all the flaws of Ferrera's Body Snatchers, it's a watchable movie. It has characters you connect with, it, and the threat of this race of pod people is very real, even though it's in farcical situations in places. I'm looking at the reviews that this got. Like Rotten Tomatoes had it as a 31% approval rating. It was nominated at the 16th Golden Raspberry Awards for Worst Prequel, Remake, Ripoff, or Sequel, which says a lot about the reaction that people were having to this film at the time. So we're very much at a point in Carpenter's career where he's going to plummet bad, I feel. Like, I look, to be debated how we think about that per se, because the next one we'll talk about will be vampires. And look, it's not great, but I have to say I have a little bit of a soft spot for that one. So, and it'd be interesting to revisit it because it's been a while, and it'd be interesting to revisit it again and then discuss that in our next John Carpenter-based podcast in a bit more detail. So, yeah, look, we're already kind of talking about these things. I've kind of said I'm not so sure if I would revisit again. Where do you land in your overall kind of opinion of this one, Oscar?
I'm very much in the same kind of boat as you. Is that really, like, as much as the poster for this, the cover of this haunted me as a child.
Yeah.
It doesn't even feel like a case of like, oh, it'll never scare me like it did when I was a kid. It's just so much duller than you wish that it should be.
Yeah.
It's quite dull. these little moments of kind of explosive action that we've got, like maybe 2 or 3 literal explosions in this movie, and they feel out of place.
Yeah.
They feel really kind of ham-fisted in.
Yeah.
And generally, you know, I can find some kind of redeeming qualities. Even like, I don't really think that we've chatted about a movie that I haven't been like, I'd recommend that or I'd revisit that. This is the first one for me that I don't have any interest in going back to, and I would absolutely not recommend to anyone.
Yeah, cool. Well, you're answering what I would normally ask anyway, but no, thank you, because that would be my question to you, is about recommending it. How do you, like, and I'm sorry I kind of intercut on you then, but how would you then how do you think a modern audience would respond to this? Say that somebody's not aware of as much as the whole iconic image of the kids is in a lot of people's periphery, especially like with the Simpsons reference you mentioned earlier. How do you think a modern audience would respond to this film if they weren't aware of the book or the 1960s version and they're just watching this one for the first time?
I think there would be something. I think particularly just with the opening, the core kind of like kicking off point is interesting.
Yeah.
It is something that would give someone enough of a kind of a nudge to be like, oh, like, what's going on here? But I think it would just, if it was on TV, if someone who'd never seen it in today's age and it was on TV, they might watch the beginning. They might watch 15, 20 minutes. I don't think it's keeping you on. I think you're going to switch.
There's something to what you just said there as well. To me, now we're talking it through, kind of feels a bit like TV movie territory in places, you know, and you could easily see it as one of those tragic daytime movies, you know, those middle of the day ones, which that's pretty tragic state of affairs
for somebody master of horror. That's real low, like a low fall from a movie that like pretty much all of his previous movies are movies that I would really actively seek to watch on a big screen.
100%.
And this, I'm like, what would be the point? Like, it shocks me that the budget was $22 million, because it feels cheap. It really feels cheap. It feels like I do not see where the money is. I guess Christopher Reeve and Kirstie Alley.
The talent they were trying to pull in. Yeah, true.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably what it was. I did read something about how it was filmed. Some of the scenes from The Fog were filmed at the same place.
Right.
That this was a place that John Carpenter had like his second home.
Okay.
And apparently the experience on the film, they really did not like a movie filming there, and really kind of quite actively aggro against it, and it apparently turned John Carpenter off the place itself.
Oh my gosh. Did it turn him off, or did the people kind of ostracize him and it
probably some mix.
I find that kind of I didn't know that fact, but I find that interesting. And if I'm reading between the lines, and again, could be completely not hitting the mark, but that does make me think even more that Carpenter kind of was ringing this in a bit, you know, presenting with the idea of remaking Religious Damned. Oh yeah, that sounds like a cool idea. We can just shoot it in my neck of the woods if you want. Come to my place and I'll knock it together. Yeah.
Wow. It's like it makes sense. Like it makes sense from a studio idea. You have this property. You're like, let's get John Carpenter to do it. He remade The Thing. It's you know, he can do it again. You know, he's adapted King. He's it makes so much sense. It's almost like whenever you hear Tim Burton is going to remake whatever he's going to remake. As a studio exec, that makes so much sense. And is like a safe bet. Where they just kind of there's like, what passion is there with that? Like, it's just a bit lackluster.
It is, and that sums up the film in all. And but I do always, and the reason I was asking you for that, you know, you reckon a modern audience would take it to it? Because I do find these movies that we talk about is like we are often watching these from the gaze of because we are cinephiles first and foremost. We love horror films, but also the film genre as an art form, and a lot of it when we discuss these films, we're watching it from the perspective of when we would have first experienced this in like either the 80s or 90s, depending on the films that we are picking to dissect and discuss. And I often wonder how warped our own views are because we carry that with it. So like, and it's something
inside of baseball.
Yeah.
As a horrophile, like,
yeah,
it's
like
a whole different thing to
your average show. I like, so like, this is the case in point, like going back to, and we'll round this out, I think, on the Blumhouse note, because Blumhouse note, in the sense that this is exactly what they're getting right at the moment, right? And it's proving time and time again they're doing it. So like, yes, our generation may look at some of the movies they're doing going, yeah, that's nowhere near as good as blah, blah, right? But the point is that it is connecting with the new audience, the people that are willing to pay the bucks to go and see these movies. And it's resonating with them, and it's regenerating these kind of classic films for that audience, and they're doing it well. Who can argue with that when at the moment the success and the money is speaking for itself? And I can only applaud Blumhouse for what they're doing. I don't always connect with all of their films, but you know, some of them I do, and I just go, yeah, bang on. But I still applaud them for even the ones I feel don't hit me personally, but they still resonate with again, where the money is. The people are willing to pay to go and see these films. So it would be. So what we're saying is, Blumhouse, make Village of the Damned. It's time to do it. Yeah, let's have a look at what you can do with this one. Putting it out to you, Jason. I hope you're listening. Until then, I think this is a good time to bow out in our discussions of John Carpenter's Village of the Damned. Did you agree with us? It sounds like we did confirm that we kind of fell in line with the general consensus of the people at the time when this was released in 1995, in that it was a bit of a dud and it didn't connect with its audience. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree? Let us know on the usual social platforms, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and let us know what you think. Until then, I'm your host, Saul Muerte, and I'd like to extend my thanks once again to my co-host in this session, Oscar Jack.
Always a pleasure.
Until next time, goodbye.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.